Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this second annual Li Jin Collection lecture in Chinese art. I'm Julia White, Senior Curator for Asian Art at BAM PFA, and today I'm delighted to welcome back to Berkeley, virtually, Dr. Julia Andrews, who received her PhD from Berkeley working with the late Professor James Cahill. In addition to Berkeley, Dr. Andrews studied Chinese language and art in Taiwan and at the Central Academy of Fine Art in Beijing in the 1980s. Dr. Andrews is well known in the field for her exceptional work in the area of modern Chinese painting. Her book, Painters and Politics in the People's Republic of China, 1949 to 1979, won the Joseph Levenson Prize for Modern China. And her Art of Modern China with Kuiyi Shen was awarded the Humanities Book Prize of the International Convention of Asia Scholars. In addition to her many monographs, she has also curated numerous exhibitions and authored catalogs in China, Hong Kong, and the United States. Today, Dr. Andrews will present a lecture reflecting on two intersecting themes: the rise of women as artists and as subjects for art in the context of the evolving status of women in 20th century China. Following this lecture, we will have time for a few questions and some discussion. Dr. Andrews' lecture today is titled Women Artists in 20th Century China, a Prehistory of the Contemporary. Please help me welcome Dr. Julia Andrews.
Thank you so much, Julia, for that kind introduction. And thank you for inviting me to this really wonderful event. One of the best known slogans of the Mao period in China was that women can hold up half the sky, expressing a widely held belief in women's potential, held by progressive citizens and educators at mid-century. Leaves artfully ambiguous the question of what kinds of responsibility women might take as they shoulder this cosmic burden. Today, I'd like to reflect on two intersecting themes: rise of women as artists and as female subjects for art, in the context of the evolving status of their gender in China. Both themes should be set against the birth of modern women's art education and the emergence of feminism, and thus are, like the art world itself, primarily urban phenomena. The first decades of the 20th century, during which all aspects of traditional social and political thought were reevaluated in response to multiple immediate crises, were a crucial period in China's move toward modernization, formulating ideals and ideologies that have continued to reverberate throughout the nation. The benefits of female agency in culture and society were among the issues argued and promoted in the mass media of the time that retained lasting ideological power. Although there was no absence of debate about changing social roles, the periodical press of the early Republican period suggests growing support for the education of women, as well as strong advocacy in educational circles for their professional development. Economic and political issues important in Western women's movements, such as family planning and women's suffrage, were debated and discussed in relationship to China's specific conditions, as were more subjective questions of the meaning of love, marriage, and friendship. Accounts from China's most modern metropolis, Shanghai, provide examples of formal art education for girls in the opening years of the 20th century. In 1902, Yang Bomin, son of a wealthy merchant who had prospered in the treaty port city, traveled to Japan to study modern pedagogy. On his return, he and his wife opened one of the earliest and most successful girls' schools to be run entirely by Chinese educators. They are also the earliest known to have established an art department in a modern school. The Yangs housed the East City Girls' School in their spacious residence on Zhuheng Street in the old Chinese city, and recruited like-minded reformers and revolutionaries as instructors. Changdong School, as English language writings of the time call it, was soon recognized both domestically and abroad. It appears in the Chinese press as early as 1904. In her 1911 book, Education of Women in China, Margaret Burton listed the Changdong School, established by Mr. and Mrs. Yang, as one of a dozen schools in Shanghai founded by Chinese educators rather than missionaries. A 1919 Columbia Teachers College study similarly records it as one that exemplified the modern movement in women's education. School principal Yang Bomin, the father of 6 daughters, stressed female self-confidence and self-sufficiency. From the authoritative Shanghai painting history, Haishang Molian, we learn of Yang Guomin's 3-decade devotion to modern style teaching for girls and of his commitment to new forms of knowledge. The school offered lodging to out-of-towners and accepted female students of all ages. Essayist Zhang Yimei describes a student body ranging from old ladies in their 40s to little girls of 12 or 13, all taught by prominent intellectuals and artists. Family members of the school's faculty, daughters, sisters, and wives alike, were among the students in this transitional era. The artistically inclined daughters of the Yang family, most notably Yang Shuiyao and Yang Shuizhou, graduated from the school in the 1910s. They and fellow graduates would, in 1934, go on to found the Chinese Women's Calligraphy and Painting Society. Yang Guomin was close to many reformist educators and publishers, including newspaper owner and art collector Di Baoshan, who published the Eastern Times and its supplement, seen here, Women's Eastern Times. Li Shutong, one of the first Chinese to graduate from the Tokyo School of Fine Arts, served as instructor and academic advisor to the school, beginning in 1915. Around 1913, Li Shutong also introduced life drawing and plein air painting to his teaching in Hangzhou. Life drawing appears soon after at Changdong School as well. Other subjects taught in 1915, the year that Yang Shuiyao and 9 other girls graduated, included Chinese language and literature, music, painting, and handicrafts, along with foreign languages, physical education, and public speaking. The 1916 graduation ceremony demonstrated the accomplishments of the students through an exhibition, choral music performance, a speech contest, instrumental recitals, a calligraphy competition, and the novel art form of the cartoon, or manhua. Li Shutong and Yu Ren judged the manhua and calligraphy contests respectively, with results reported in the newspaper. That girls were trained in public speaking suggests expanding expectations for their social roles, stated as righting injustice, promoting education, supporting both family and nation, as well as diligence and frugality. Yang Guomin's passion for traditional Chinese painting, a subject he included in the school curriculum, was somewhat unusual for a modern educator. He had learned painting from his famous grandfather, Zhu Cheng, and had some reputation himself as a painter of bamboo and orchids. When Yang died at the age of 50 in 1924, his daughter Xuezhou took over as principal of the school. Along with new style education, such as that offered by Yang Guomin and his colleagues, the early 20th century saw the appearance of mass media aimed at appealing to and guiding urban Chinese citizens in reformulating the role of women and girls in society. When China's most significant modern publisher, the Commercial Press, began publishing Ladies' Journal in 1915, it used as cover designs a series of 12 images that featured young women engaged in various activities of daily life. These covers were by Xu Yongqing, a commercial artist who had been trained at the Jesuit Boys' Orphanage in Xujiahui, outside Shanghai. The first issue announces itself to its potential readers with a girl reading in an urban garden, emphasizing the role of women as consumers of the new mass media. The cover of issue 2 is set in a Western-style interior, with an electric light overhead and an ornate clock on the wall. Here the publisher affirms female artistic creativity as a fashionably dressed young woman, brush in hand, gazes thoughtfully down at the partially completed painting tacked to her tilted drafting board. Surrounded by various tools and supplies, including a square and a painting manual, she is one of the first images to appear of a woman painting in the Western manner. Among the stated goals of the editors of Ladies' Journal were to promote women's art, to facilitate understanding of Western culture, to investigate the status of women's schools, and to demonstrate the varied occupations of women. The many images of women artists published on its pages include one depicting a young calligrapher, Flora Fong, on the site of a charitable exhibition she organized in 1918. In the same year, the Ladies' Journal devoted every cover to a different painting by the 65-year-old female painter, Wu Shujuan, both confirming her professional attainments and offering a model career for readers. The privately run Shanghai Art College, always keen to pick up the latest trend, published Wu Shujuan's likeness in the first volume of the School Art Journal in 1919, at around the time they introduced co-educational instruction. Ink painting remained a vibrant part of the Shanghai art market, despite growing interest in Western forms of art. That her name appeared often in the press suggests an improving position for women artists in the new art world and in the celebrity culture of the first quarter of the 20th century. The 1920s began to see the emergence of female artists trained in the new Western style education. Among them is Guan Zilan, a graduate of the China Art College, where she studied with Japan-trained oil painters Chen Baoyi and Ding Yanyong. Continuing her own education in Japan in 1927, she exhibited her work there repeatedly and returned to great celebrity in Shanghai in 1930. Work in her 1941 solo exhibition was praised for compositional power that was the match of any man, as well as for her luminous color. Equally prominent among women returned from study abroad was the French educated oil painter Pan Yuliang, who went on to a career as an art professor. Pan and her still life painting with a skull, the conventional European theme of memento mori, is represented here as though to expose her to be a daring violator of traditional Chinese taboos in the name of art. In 1927, she, along with Wu Shujuan's disciple Li Qiujun and some male colleagues, established a prominent collaborative atelier in Shanghai, the Yiyuan, that served as a site for lessons and as the organizing institution for their exhibitions in Shanghai. Over previous decades, these artists had been active in the Pegasus Society, which pioneered modern art exhibitionary practice in 1920s Shanghai. Interest by the popular press of the day in women of accomplishment became part of the celebrity culture of Shanghai publishing in the 1920s and 1930s, and made certain women painters household names. Among the darlings of the tabloid press were poet painters Zhou Liansha and Lu Shaoman, famed not only for their art, but for their beauty, literary talents, and romantic appeal. Meanwhile, the female figure, or the female nude, became projections of the ideals of beauty and artistic liberation for artists working in virtually all oil painting styles of the day, male and female alike. In contrast to this celebratory exploration of the female body, among Shanghai leftists, women as the victim of injustice were often vehicles for social criticism. The Ministry of Education's first national art exhibition opened in 1929 to great fanfare. Although the proportion of female artists was still relatively small, the artists of 13 of the 192 ink paintings were identified as women, and female names are recognizable among the oil painters. The proportion is still higher than a catalog published 45 years later during the Cultural Revolution, a period of state-mandated feminism. Ladies' Journal published a substantial special issue about the 1929 show. By 1934, a group of women artists, including Li Qiujun and Yang Xuejiu, most of them veterans of the 1929 exhibition, had established the Women's Calligraphy and Painting Society, which held exhibitions once or twice a year and published its members' works. Some of these women went on to prominence in subsequent decades, and several of them were appointed to the prestigious Shanghai Chinese Painting Institute in the late 1950s. This generation found support in female-only groups, but also flourished in the larger art world of the day. In the cities, the foundations for a future of sustained female participation in the mainstream art world were firmly in place by the outbreak of the 8-year Sino-Japanese War in 1937. Pre-war examples of self-portraits suggest that the genre was not limited to male artists, although there were a vast number of such portraits painted by them. one created on the eve of the war in 1937 by painter, cartoonist, and activist Yu Feng, is far more fierce than that of most of the male self-portraits, perhaps a character trait that sustained her lifetime career. Another, painted in Paris at the war's close by the weary Pan Yuliang, conveys a sense of resignation. Women who lived in Treaty Port Shanghai, like Guan Zilan or Li Qiujun, continued to exhibit until the Pacific War broke out, sometimes as fundraisers for the Chinese troops. The Chinese Women's Calligraphy and Painting Society exhibited in Shanghai until the treaty port fell to the Japanese at the end of 1941, and a few of its members were in benefit exhibitions even after that. Artists who fled their homes to escape the invading army, however, or who were refugees from the destruction the bombings had caused, had a much more difficult time, and few of their paintings have yet surfaced. We know of talented artists like the European-educated Cai Weilian, who died, and others who struggled to tend to their families in the harsh conditions of refugee life, like Japanese-educated Qiu Ti, a celebrated member of the avant-garde Storm Society in 1930s Shanghai. Qiu Ti's pioneering career as an avant-garde painter was interrupted by the necessities of wartime family life. One of her wartime projects was to sell handmade dolls, which also served as subject matter for the artist herself and for her male colleague, Chang Shuhong, whose daughter Shana received one from Qiu Ti as a gift. In ill health after the war, Qiu Ti was never able to fully resume her artistic career and died of a heart attack during the anti-rightist campaign. As painted by male artists, women in wartime served as images of tragedy. On which gender do the burdens of existential hardship weigh most heavily? It's one of the questions to be asked as research on art of the Sino-Japanese War period proceeds. Still, near the end of the war, we find Yu Feng exhibiting with 12 men of modernist inclination. A very small number of female artists emerged from the Yan'an communist base, women who would form the bureaucratic and pedagogical elite after 1949. Female art student Zhang Xiaofei joined the Red Army in Yan'an, and there made instructional illustrations on themes essential to women and families, such as public health, sanitation, and midwifery. After 1948, she was one of the few women at the heart of the powerful new arts administration of the People's Republic of China. Whether prosperous Shanghai ladies or female revolutionaries at Yan'an, a critical mass of women advocated for social progress that would move women and families forward in the mid-20th century. Mao Zedong's Yan'an talks of 1942, which stipulated that artists must adopt the viewpoint of the workers, peasants, and soldiers, led to a dramatic, even radical, state-mandated change in the practice of art in the communist base area. Styles believed to be most legible to rural peasants replaced the urban aesthetic vocabulary of the Shanghai revolutionaries. After the communist victory in 1949, forms of art that had flourished in the 1930s and 1940s, including various forms of cosmopolitan oil painting, ranging from post-impressionism to surrealism, were banned as bourgeois, while the practice of ink painting, despite its significant innovations in this period, was generally condemned as elitist, feudal, and out of touch with Chinese needs and realities. To accomplish the aim of remolding art and the art world, artists who could be retrained were retrained, while those who could not were retired or redirected, often as craft decorators or middle school teachers. At the same time, a younger generation was educated, creating a new art world to replace the old. Women like Guan Zilan were left behind. A few women emerged in this new revolutionary period. One of the most successful in winning the trust of the party art establishment was Deng Shu, a peasant girl from Hebei who joined the Communist Party at the age of 17. Her early work, Learning to Read, depicts a literacy class in which children and newly liberated female peasants study side by side. In 1949, the artist went to work at the Central Academy of Fine Arts, She won a first prize in the Ministry of Culture Awards for New Year's pictures in 1952 with the image at right of newly literate peasants signing a peace petition during the Korean War. The other first prize was awarded to a male artist, Lin Gang, who depicted Zhao Guilan, a female model worker, at her audience with Chairman Mao. Deng Shu and Lin Gang were then awarded prestigious scholarships to study in Leningrad at the Repin Art Institute. Proving that ink painting could serve the party, Zhang Yan transformed the outline and color technique to depict subject matter suitable to the PRC's new social policies, a peasant learning to read. Zhang's rising reputation was tragically ended by a fatal plane crash. Despite the great care taken in the first years of the PRC that women artists were represented in exhibitions, what is striking when we survey the art world of the entire Mao period from 1949 to 1979 is that the social changes one might have expected to see in New China did not in the end expand the art world to a more fully egalitarian participation by women. Indeed, based upon the now well-established canon of socialist realist works produced in this period, one must argue that it instead contracted it. Documenting absence is always a tricky business, but a few statistics confirm this general impression. The rather small administrative structure for the National All China Art Workers Association, established in July 1949, included no female members on the standing committee, or as far as I can find, on any major administrative committee. Its umbrella organization, the Federation of Literature and Art Circles, had only one, the novelist Ding Ling. With a major expansion of arts administration in 1960, the Chinese Artists Association added 5 female artists to its list of 112, still fewer than 50%. The Cultural Revolution was clearly a step backwards. By its end in 1979, women comprised only 5 of 182 directors, less than 3%. Of the 5, 2 were among the 43 standing committee members, still less than 5%. Painters who grew up during the Republican era but graduated from the elite Central Academy of Fine Arts in the early years of the People's Republic would form the strongest cohort of women artists of the Mao period. Most were admitted to the former Beiping Art Academy before the communist takeover in 1949. All completed graduate training in painting and became well-respected teachers, but none received the prestigious official commissions enjoyed by their male classmates, including their husbands, all of whom were artists as well. Zhao Youping, Beijing-born of Manchurian ancestry, graduated in 1953. She earned a graduate degree in 1955 and then taught the academy for 40 years. Although well regarded by her colleagues and students, she received few of the prestigious state commissions enjoyed by many of her male classmates. The slightly younger Pang Tao, born in Shanghai to the modernist painters Qiu Di and Pang Shunqin, inclined to a more lyrical style and similarly carried the classroom burden for the academy after her graduation in 1955. Zhang Ziyi, a native of Nanjing, similarly earned 2 degrees in painting at the Central Academy of Fine Arts, and in 1955 was assigned a provincial job in the Masses Art Center in Xi'an. Only after the Cultural Revolution did she become a professor at the prestigious Zhejiang Academy of Fine Arts in Hangzhou. Her career was set back by the political troubles of her husband, Cai Liang, who had the bad fortune to be targeted in the anti-Hu Feng campaign of 1955 and was sent to Xi'an as punishment. Women as subjects remain common in the works of male artists. Women as models of heroism, as model collective formers, as model minorities, as future female members of the intelligentsia, and as the driving force behind rural communization. Despite such pictorial idealization, the elite group of about 20 students chosen in 1955 to participate in a 2-year oil painting course taught by the Soviet expert Konstantin Maximov included no women except the translator. The only female member of the class was reportedly dismissed on the grounds of poor attendance at the Academy's mandatory class on revolutionary politics. To my knowledge, of the dozen or more students sent to learn painting in Soviet bloc countries, and who thereafter comprised the elite of China's official art world, only Deng Shu was female. Of the next generation, the first cohort of Central Academy graduates admitted after 1949, the oil painter Wenbo achieved some recognition for her skill in rendering female subjects and was hired as a teacher at the school. Painted in the wake of the catastrophic Great Leap Forward, her most famous work is an upbeat picture of well-fed peasant girls, a happy image with which to forget the recent famine. The compelling feminist slogan with which we began, that women can hold up half the sky, circulated widely domestically and internationally during the Cultural Revolution from 1966 to 1976. In its propagandist context, this rhetoric carried the utopian assumption that the equality of men and women in the workforce and the family had already been achieved. Girls wore the same plain baggy clothes as boys, creating an androgynous image of China's revolutionary workforce. Yet it is in this era, the period when China's baby boomers reached maturity, that the divergence between image and actuality seemed greatest. A Red Guard cartoon by the woman artist Wang Rulan that documents the purge of China's political elite in the early Cultural Revolution period found only two women worthy of caricature, Wang Guangmei and Yan Weibing, the wives of politicians Liu Shaoqi and Lu Dingyi. Seizing on tropes of vanity and jealousy, the artist mocks Wang for wearing pearls and high heels to a diplomatic function, and Yan for penning anonymous denunciations of a woman she envied. Despite rhetoric to the contrary, the scarcity of women artists and their relatively subordinate positions proved to be the rule rather than the exception. Beginning in 1968, urban girls were sent, along with boys, to labor in China's remote border areas. This is an idealized image of such as seen by a male artist. During the reign of fear that brought normal social relations to a halt, art almost ceased, as most artists, old and young, male and female, were forced to do labor of other kinds. In 1972, however, following exposure of the alleged treason of Mao Zedong's chosen successor, Lin Biao, some of the most symbolic of government functions, including art exhibitions, were revived. The 1972 National Art Exhibition, and a second in 1974, solicited artworks from workers, peasants, and soldiers, including rusticated youth. To guarantee the quality of the exhibition, despite the desired non-professional status of its worker, peasant, soldier artists, organizers recruited an elite team of painting correction professionals to Beijing for the purpose of retouching any exhibits declared by the political leadership to have aesthetic or ideological flaws. Even as propagandists disseminated China's feminist slogans worldwide, none of the high-profile young oil painters selected for this task was female, and only one worked in the Chinese painting correction group. The Illustrated Handbook of the subsequent show in 1974 published only 6 works by female artists, including an oil by Cheng Li. The canonical works of the Cultural Revolution period, thus, are mainly by men. The aesthetic program of China's cultural leader of the time, Mao Zedong's wife, Jiang Qing, guided the thematic and stylistic requirements of this exhibition art. They should be Maoist themes with workers, peasants, or soldiers as subject. The figure should be depicted heroically, the main character illuminated theatrically. Given Jiang Qing's avowed feminism, these heroic subjects were often preferred to be female and are usually highly dramatized. Pan Zhajun's I Am Petrol, for example, renders a ruddy-faced young woman suspended high atop a telephone pole in the midst of a raging storm. Undaunted by wind or rain, she perilously tests the transmission by quoting Maxim Gorky's revolutionary poem, Song of the Stormy Petrel. 6 years after Mao initiated the Russification movement, as its negative aspects became more widely known, the leadership tried to reorient public opinion by celebrating its alleged success with images of barefoot doctors, coal miners, and young women inspired by the actresses in Jiang Qing's model performances. Representing the peasantry in these exhibitions were many rusticated urban youth, teenagers from the city who were sent for re-education by rural labor. The Beidahuang printmakers, who worked near the Siberian border, were such young people, selected for artistic talent and transferred temporarily from farm labor to rebuild the nation's cultural infrastructure. A well-received multi-block woodcut welcoming spring by one of the rare female participants, Wang Lan, represents an idealized winter scene of the military farm on which she worked. During the months when it was too snowy and cold for outdoor labor, a girl carefully tends the sprouts that will be planted after the last frost. This lyrical image of a woman by a woman managed to satisfy both the formal and thematic requirements of the era. Wang Lan, a Beijing girl who was rusticated to Heilongjiang at the age of 16, later became a college professor in Shenyang before immigrating to Australia in 1991. Given the intense focus on women's empowerment in this era and its vivid projection in 1970s imagery of Cultural Revolution China, one has to wonder why only these few women were brought into public view. Why have so few women made it into the lasting canon of modern Chinese art? At the end of the Cultural Revolution, even the unofficial art groups that emerged in 1979, like the Stars or the Xingxing in Beijing, were male activities. One single girl, Li Shuang, was a core member of the Stars, an art group associated with the Democracy Wall movement in 1979. She later served a prison term for her love affair with a French diplomat, and then, like most of her fellow artists in the group, moved abroad. A remarkable exception was the group of girls and boys who banded together during the last years of the Cultural Revolution to paint apolitical landscapes. A small painting by one of the women artists, Zheng Ziyan, depicts the view from the apartment where they often illicitly gathered. They emerged for an officially sponsored exhibition in the summer of 1979, taking the group name Wuming, and thereafter vanished from the art world for decades. Unusual for their time, about half the loosely affiliated participants were women. With the establishment of more normal cultural, civic, and governmental institutions after the Cultural Revolution, the art educational system was also revived and soon reassumed its dominant position in the art world. The nurturing of female talent within China's art academies was thus a precondition of women assuming significant roles as professional artists. When I first lived in Beijing in 1980 at the Central Academy of Fine Arts, the entire enrollment of girls was housed at one end of a single dormitory corridor, which had been sectioned off from the rest of the male students by adding a wall to block the hall. Although the overall college enrollment was not large, female students were extremely few. None were admitted to the most prestigious graduate program, oil painting, in the first cohort after the Cultural Revolution. It was only the new and less well-established programs that might take a chance on a young woman. The graduate mural painting department accepted one who went on to make a significant career abroad, Hong Liu, or Liu Hong in Chinese. The undergraduate programs in oil painting and printmaking each enrolled 2. 10 others were concentrated in the ink painting major. On graduation, however, most were assigned to administrative jobs. This small number of female students contrasts with the relatively gender-balanced art school enrollments achieved during the Nanjing decade of the Republican period. At China's second key art college, the Zhejiang Academy of Fine Arts, the situation was only slightly better. Although the few female students made some mark, there were simply not very many of them. Wang Gongyi, a 1980 graduate of the master's program in printmaking, was hired as a professor there, then eventually moved to the United States. the Shanghai-born artist Shi Hui entered the academy in the first class to be selected by competitive examination after the Cultural Revolution. She was hired as an instructor after graduating in applied arts in 1982, and between 1986 and 1989, worked closely with the Bulgarian textile artist Marin Varbanov in his postgraduate workshop to develop modernist fiber art in China. Her career has flourished in recent years as China's art world has become more international. Chen Haiyan, a printmaker who graduated in 1984, was also hired by the Academy to teach. Quietly pursuing her exploration of the subconscious in a diary-like series of dream images, she's continued to attract attention at home and abroad for her powerfully expressive work. The graduating class of 1985 in oil painting had only one young woman, Wang Lihua. She was chosen for a workshop offered by a visiting professor from Paris, Zhao Wuji, in 1985 as the sole female student. She then taught at the Shanghai Drama Academy before moving to the US, where she has found her voice as an installation artist. Despite this handful of success stories, women art students in the 1980s were still extremely few, and as this generation matured, the art world naturally became even more male-dominated. As it turned out, Zhejiang graduates and young faculty members would play a crucial role in the so-called 85 New Wave movement, an exhilarating and well-publicized effort to overthrow the stale socialist realist art of the old establishment. The New Wave crested with the 1989 China Avant-Garde exhibition, which was unfortunately followed by a 3-year cultural freeze in the wake of the June 4th massacre. When China reopened in 1993, young men like Wang Guangyi and Zhang Peili reemerged to lead contemporary Chinese art in a direction that could speak to international audiences. Given the few girl students in their school, it's no surprise that women were scarce in this historical movement, and that they remain relatively few in what developed into a new artistic elite with its roots in the 1980s. One quiet exception is Chen Haiyan, who has steadily exhibited. A small group of young women graduated from the Central Academy of Fine Arts in 1988, and by 1989 and 1990, held exhibitions together as women artists. Of them, Yu Hong has persisted with the most sustained exhibition program and most vividly paints from a female perspective. Appointed to the Central Academy of Fine Arts faculty at age 22, she exhibited twice in the Venice Biennale in the 1990s and went on to earn a master's degree from the school in 1996. Yu Hong's painting, steeped in social commentary, often has an autobiographical strain and a disconcerting, almost clinical observation of the contemporary Chinese society in which she lives. Her Ladder to the Sky exemplifies the urban social concerns of her generation. Our puzzlement at what initially seems like surrealism turns to dismay when we realize that she has depicted an array of Beijing people, old and young, male and female, as they struggle up a heavenly ladder of social progress, none ever arriving, but some losing their footing and plunging off the ladder as though falling to hell. Each person approaches the challenge with a different attitude, from stubborn rejection to cautious anxiety to excessive eagerness. As our eyes descend from this parable-like figurative composition, we find our concern for their peril echoed in the posture of a little girl on the ladder's lowest rung at left, a representative of the new generation who has been born into the contemporary dog-eat-dog society. Many of the characters in this drama are based on likenesses of people the artist knows. Her daughter, for example, is represented in the upper right at the top of the ladder. Yu Hong herself was a child during the Cultural Revolution. The society into which she was born was one supported by a utopian ideology of communal revolution. And much of her work has probed the unmoored state of the individual, often characterized in autobiographical terms as an urban woman, when those communal goals were shattered in the post-Mao era. The China of her daughter's future is one apparently stripped of all traces of this communitarian past, leaving each individual to be pushed forward, like it or not, by new economic and social pressures. Trained in the techniques of socialist realism, its ideals were dead by the time Yu Hong graduated, and we may term her approach post-socialist realist. Her work has always concentrated on the private rather than the public, preferring to use painting as a question rather than as an answer. She is one of a growing, but still comparatively small number of women painters in her generation to establish a sustained career over these past 3 decades. Coming from a very different starting point is the somewhat younger Sichuanese Guohua painter and conceptual artist, Pong Wei, who also lives in Beijing. The daughter of an ink painter, she received her formal artistic education at Nankai University in Tianjin. Her work often refers, in general terms, to antique masterpieces, but she objectifies them in ways that make evident the vast gulf between the modern painter and the masters of the art historical canon. And she puts anachronistic female actors on her stage. Rather than valorizing the accomplishments of a specific artist or a work of art as a traditionalist painter might do, the past seems to be an undifferentiated source of equally weighted visual ideas. She creates tableau albums, hanging scrolls, or hand scrolls by painting in polychromatic watercolor on both sides of her rough handmade paper, rendering with great care every part of the object, including both the image of a painting and the elaborate silk textile borders which would ornament its mounting. At first glance, a virtuoso technical performance, Pong Wei's gorgeous postmodern emulation of pre-modern mounting practices might be a challenge to the venerable Chinese artistic tradition. By claiming its superficial trappings as her own, she easily injects herself into the canon without the mediation of critic, historian, or collector, and by implication, questions or even casts aside the entire millennium-long art historical apparatus. Scrutiny of the long colophon-like passages that she juxtaposes with her seemingly classicizing paintings makes this abundantly clear. Rather than predictable transcriptions of Chinese poetry, they are normally passages from books she is reading, usually translated texts of European philosophy, biography, or literature. A series of silken shoes in which she has painted half-hidden erotic images in a Ming style raise other kinds of questions about the female perspective, as do her mannequin installations. It is encouraging that the expansion of China's economy and greater freedom of travel, at least before COVID-19, gave artists new venues for exhibiting and new ways of engaging with the art world. Beijing artist Zhang Yanzi, stranded for a year in her daughter's New York apartment by the pandemic, responded to her surroundings, painting masks and apparently a dancer incarcerated by an oven rack, both recently shown at Art Basel. Artists who emerged from the 1980s avant-garde have been able to establish international reputations that have now been recognized at home and have gradually broken down the boundaries of official art. Female artists, being less numerous to begin with, remain far less represented among those who've emerged internationally, but this is changing. Insistence by foreign curators, inspired by feminism or egalitarianism, that exhibitions of contemporary art must include some female artists, has played a role in giving them the opportunity to be seen, a first step for artists of talent to establish lasting careers. Because showing abroad is usually seen as legitimation by the domestic art world, such opportunities have helped more than a few women enter the mainstream art world. Why, after a promising start, did female artists lose ground in the second half of the 20th century, so that a recuperation of their status has been necessary in the 21st? Although gender equality is a worldwide issue, one factor unique to China is the overwhelming ideological importance accorded after 1949 to Mao Zedong's Yan'an talks on literature and art, which explicitly aimed to bring urban intellectuals with their bothersome independence of thought down to the level of peasants who were assumed to be more easily manipulated. This also opened the door for rural administrators to bring their more traditional social ideas into China's advanced urban centers. This may be a factor, along with the largely man-made catastrophes China suffered between 1957 and 1979, for the setback to women's equality that has not been completely overcome even today. Relatively recent changes have transformed the environment in which women learn and work. In 1999, for example, it was decided to radically expand the enrollments at China's elite art academies, leading to the construction of colossal new campuses. Instead of 10 or 12 or 15 students in each graduating cohort, there are now thousands, many of them women. Among this vastly larger number of aspiring artists, one assumes more will succeed. Furthermore, whatever negative effects the one-child policy, in effect from 1979 to 2016, has had, in the cities, it has produced a generation of confident only children, women who had no brothers and usually enjoyed a great degree of family support for their education and career goals. The increasing number of competent women occupying supporting roles, including curators, gallerists, and art educators, is evident. Yet, mandatory retirement for female cadres at age 55 limits the power of arts administrators to mentor younger women. It may be too early to tell how these factors will affect the reputations and careers of women artists, but I hope this expansion of the art world and booming market will offer opportunities. We are left with many questions about gender, art object, and society. For a variety of reasons, some linguistic and others social, most Chinese women today do not identify as feminist. Why is this? Is no further need for women's progress evident? Social activism in China today, especially when it demands human rights or women's rights or anyone's rights, is an increasingly risky business. Many object to being pigeonholed or segregated. They consider themselves artists, first and foremost, without any limiting term describing gender or ethnicity. Most are also subject to Confucian parental pressure to marry and raise children. Will women's continued progress in art or in society take place without explicit feminism? And even if the artist herself brushes off these concerns, should we avoid asking such questions of her art? Well, thank you very much for coming, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Judy. Gosh, that was so interesting. And it's such an interesting topic, and you covered it in just thoroughly and with such attention to the details of women in China during that time period. I'd like to ask our audience if they have questions to please put them in the Q&A. We have a few minutes for questions, and I'm going to start it off with something that I'm kind of, just would like to explore a little bit and would like to kind of pick your brain about. And that's, your description of women artists throughout the early 20th century up through the 80s and 90s is really beautifully described. And it's very interesting, the phenomenon. And I'd like to ask you if you could elaborate a bit more on the situation in the 1990s when women, and for that matter, men also, male artists as well, were leaving China to establish careers abroad, and especially those who went to the art centers in New York City. Could you kind of go into a little bit more detail maybe about how they fared?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Julia. And I'd also like to thank everyone for coming to listen today, as well as thank Vinnie Miller for sponsoring this lovely event. In terms of what happened to women artists in the late 1980s and early 1990s, you're absolutely right that a great many left China during that period. It was there was such a pent-up desire for all artists and many other people in China to just find out what was going on in the outside world after the Cultural Revolution. And particularly for artists, if you cannot see works of art with your own eyes in the original, it's so difficult to really understand what's going on. So there was a great outflow of Chinese artists, actually beginning in the early 1980s, but continuing, accelerating by the end of the 1980s. And a number of the artists that I had at the very end of my PowerPoint, Lin Tian Miao and Yin Shou Zhen, Yu Hong, and others did go abroad in that period. Yin Shou Zhen is one prominent figure.
Mm-hmm.
What happened to most of the artists when they got abroad, though, was a really difficult adjustment. Many didn't speak much English initially and had a lot of trouble making contact with other artists, with galleries, with and anyone that would enable them to really plug into the art world in New York. And so for the most part, I think they learned a lot, but it was more of a hiatus in the development of their careers in terms of reputation and so forth than actually immediately contributing to it. There were some exceptions. The 1989 Inside Out exhibition at Asia Society marked a really seminal moment, and there were a number of women artists in that exhibition. The show that we did for the Guggenheim as well in the same year had some female artists, mostly historical figures. But it was still a little bit early in terms of the acceptance of Chinese art in the New York art world. And so most who were there in that time didn't participate in too many major shows. It was only later in the period after 1993, as China was reopening and as building up to the Olympics, that and entering a 20-year period of liberalization, that China became more and more open. International travel back and forth, which was really important, became possible. And at that same moment, the Western world began paying attention to Chinese art. And so women artists began to appear in Western exhibitions, in gallery shows and so forth from that time on. And we do now see some collected by MoMA and other major collections, which was not the case much earlier.
Thank you so much. We have a few questions. I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to them all, but Janet Roberts asks, is this art history of women artists in China pursued in Chinese universities?
Not so much as far as I know. Yeah. Yeah. There are scholars interested in it, and there are some scholars who write about it, but I don't think that, as far as I've heard, formal courses, which would be great, are not offered either here or there at this point.
Interesting. Chen Fang writes, thank you so much for this wonderful talk, Professor Andrews. Could you elaborate on why Yu Feng and Deng Shu were selected for the 1945 modern painting exhibition and for the oil painting class of Konstantin Maksimov in 1957, respectively? Thank you.
Well, the 1945 modern art exhibition is something that I needs a lot more research, and I've not done enough work on that to say why Yu Feng was in the show, except that she remained very active throughout this period, and she was a quite good painter and was known to be good by her fellow artists. So yeah, so I'm really not sure what, this was an artist organized show. They came together and put it on themselves. So, but that's something that needs further research, and maybe looking into the periodical press or whatever would help on that. In terms of Deng Shu, it was a very different situation when she was exhibited, because it was very much a top-down kind of organization. She was selected by the party administration to be in the show, in part because she painted well, but also I think because of her class background. She came from the peasant class, and particularly in 1952, the idea of foregrounding a peasant painter who had emerged under the new communist government was a good piece of public relations for the government. And so so they were really, in only seven short years, there was a real difference in approach.
Mhm. I think we have time for maybe just one more question from Karen Stock, who asked, could Julia speak more about the way feminism was defined in the Maoist era versus feminism in 21st century Chinese culture?
That's also very good and quite difficult question.
Yeah.
In the Mao period, everything was pretty much top down, and so there were assumptions, I think, that women would go into the workforce. Everyone was expected to go into the workforce if they could, and that was a change for many families. But there was, for the most part, no accompanying change in the domestic scene. So women generally were expected to do 200% of their previous jobs. But it was codified, lauded in the Women's Association, which was under party authority. What came to be, I think, regarded domestically by many people as a kind of propagandistic sort of organ. For other people, it provided opportunities, but for many, they kind of brushed it off as not that significant. Mm-hmm. But in the post-Mao period, it's a lot more complicated, and there are art historians and critics and feminists who are interested in this problem. But for the most part, particularly women artists do not want to be identified as feminist. In many cases, they don't want to be identified as women either. They just want to be artists, and that's perfectly understandable. But there's an almost sort of contaminating feeling about being labeled a feminist, as though you are you're selfish, you're only interested in your own personal future, you are uncaring toward your family, toward your society, and so this violation of the Confucian social and family connections, I think, makes it something that only the most radical of women are willing to take on. Mm-hmm. And another reason, I think, is just a kind of linguistic thing, that one of the names, the most common name for feminism is New Trend, which means women's rights. And that, of course, goes along with human rights. Most famously, we probably recall that Hillary Clinton went to the 1995 International Women's Conference in Beijing and said that women's rights are human rights. But of course, talking about human rights in China can get you into a lot of trouble, identified as a dissident and therefore someone who um, is under suspicion, if not worse, by the authorities. And so that is another sort of taboo against using that term, regardless of what you're actually doing through your own actions to try to promote fellow women or make progress yourself, or um, uh, or engage in what other aspects of what we in the West might call feminist feminist activity.
Thank you. I'm afraid we're just about out of time. We still have some interesting questions, and I'm sorry we're not going to be able to get to them all. But I would like to say thank you to Vinnie Miller and the Li Jin Collection for sponsoring this annual lecture, and to let all of you know that the recording will be available on the BAM-PFA website and on our YouTube channel eventually. And I'd also like to say thank you to Sherry Goodman, the Director of Education, who made the arrangements for this lecture. We hope to be able to welcome you all back to BAM-PFA very soon. We are open Friday, Saturday, and Sundays now, and our hours will continue to expand. Judy, I can't thank you enough. This has just been a wonderful, wonderful talk and such an interesting topic. Thank you very much.
Oh, well, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I wish I could see everybody in real life, and let's hope we can do so soon.
Soon, I hope. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.